So let's relax and let's try to do a little meditation, set of motivation. This is our last regular class beside the practice day. So as the Buddha did, as was mentioned in so many sutras, he sat down on a cushion, arranged his body, spine erect, and placed his attention on the respiration in front. So let's do like the Buddha first of all and use that close placement of mindfulness on the respiration first of all to calm our minds. Don't watch your body. Don't watch the shape of your body. Then as the mind gets calmer, withdraw your attention further inside to your heart chakra and just watch the mental consciousness with the mental consciousness. Here, the watching is purposeful. You're trying to notice the nature, the conventional nature of the mind as clear light. Between the thoughts at first, as they are frequent. Later, even just letting go of the thoughts, seeing, perceiving that clear light, even when the thoughts are momentarily there, defocusing on the objects, refocusing on the subjective mind, clear light within which they're arising. The appearance to your mind is of a vast spaciousness, as in the Buddhist tradition of Mahamudra, in the sutra, so-called sutra presentation. And as it says there, in the Gelugpa tradition, once the mind is quieted by watching the conventional nature of the mind, then investigate the ultimate nature. So as we've been learning, first within this space, try to identify, recognize the object of negation. The object, the conceived object of the innate self-grasping. The sense of I as a truly existent or inherently existent thing, or in other words, something existing from its own side. Within your mind, the perception of something there, the self, the soul, as though not merely imputed by the mind, but having some real existence from its own side, as though findable within the basis of designation. Something real, true. If you're not familiar with the meditation at the beginning, it's good to try to incite the appearance of the I by recalling some praise or some blame, something emotionally stimulating, and watch, then let go of that thought. Watch the residual I when you've been accused unjustly or praised. Don't confuse the watcher here with that I. You may see, well, it looks like the subject self, I, looking at the subject self, I. It's just the consciousness observing the appearance of that object. The sense of self, if it existed, would have to either be, if it were existing the way that it appears from its own side, inherently, truly, it would have to be truly one with our aggregates, the basis for designating the self. Or it would have to be truly other than them. Any two phenomena, such as the self and the aggregates, either have to be identical or different. If it were identical to the aggregates, in this truly existent sense, it would have to be utterly one with the aggregates. The aggregates in the self would be one, and there would be no sense of saying my body. It would be the same as saying the body's body, because the body is one of your aggregates. You couldn't say my mind. There would be no differentiation of a self different from the mind. If the self, this truly existent self, were truly different than the aggregates, would have to be utterly different, unrelated, existing from its own side without reliance upon the aggregates, because it's truly existent, not just conventionally existent. If that were the case, if the aggregates suffered some harm, we'd never say, I'm harmed. If the aggregates were sick, we wouldn't say, I am sick. They'd be unrelated. If someone stuck a pin in your finger, you wouldn't say, that hurt me, because they'd be unrelated. As an inherently existent self could only be one where the aggregates are different from the aggregates, and it's neither. It's not identical with the aggregates. Could not be, because of the many, many absurd consequences that we could show, as we did before. It's not inherently or truly different than the aggregates. Therefore, the only possibility is that it does not exist. The conceived object, the mental image, of course, of the I exists, but the object that we're conceiving of in referring to the conventionally existent self, conceiving it as a truly existent object via a mental image of that, that conceived object is utterly non-existent. See if you can perceive that emptiness for the welfare of others, to let go of your anger, attachment, laziness, jealousy, pride, depression. Like a vast space, emptiness. Here, the mere negation of that I, as before we were perceiving the mere negation of obstructiveness of the mind. If you have fortune, a feeling of incredible bliss can arise. Wonderful, I'm saved. There is no I that's causing me all these problems. It's a figment of my imagination, this truly existent I. There was never a truly existent I who created the negative karma that I've accumulated in the past. This is one of the powerful ways to purify that. There was never a truly existent I who created virtue. It's a powerful way to dedicate that virtue, to protect it from being burned up by anger. All sentient beings laboring under the belief, the strong grasping to this truly existent I, all those that are still within cyclic existence, objects of our compassion. They want to be free of suffering just as we. They want to be happy. So for their welfare, I'm going to participate in the final class tonight on the Madhyamaka view, the prasangika, the subtlemost culmination of Buddha's view of emptiness, philosophical schools, to bring that about, that realization, the wisdom of emptiness within my own continuum for the welfare of sentient beings. Bring your attention back to the present. Okay. So, any questions? No one ever has any questions in this class. I'm a little bit afraid. I'm not sure that means you all know, or Mark has a question.
I'm not sure of the difference between direct perception and perceiving directly. What is it?
You can perceive something with a direct perception indirectly, such as when we talk about in the Sautrantika point of Tenets, they say that because the appearing object of direct perception has to be a impermanent phenomena, such as the objects of the five senses, and even the direct, even mental direct perception, its appearing object, the appearing object has to be an impermanent phenomena. So, for instance, in yogic direct perception, which is a kind of direct perception, which is mental, you're actually perceiving, on the basis of calm abiding and penetrative insight, the aggregates, your own aggregates, which are impermanent. And by seeing them, you indirectly know, while you're seeing them and knowing that they're impermanent, you're indirectly knowing that that combination of five aggregates are empty of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So you can know that selflessness via a direct perception, but you're not knowing it directly. You're knowing it indirectly. So that's an example that was given at that time. Okay? You're not. I mean, you have a
direct perception of emptiness.
So in the upper tenets, the Mahayana tenets, they say there is no necessity, or we say there's no privation, that a direct perceiver, the appearing object of direct perceiver has to be impermanent. For the upper tenets, the Madhyamaka especially, also Chittamatra, the appearing object of mental direct perception can be a permanent phenomena, such as emptiness. You can, at first, you know it. First, you know emptiness via a mental image. You know it conceptually. But by continually knowing it conceptually, the mental image begins to become, in a sense, transparent. And because of that accumulation of merit that you're accumulating, say, on the past path of accumulation and path of preparation, preparing or joining your mind to that, the ability to be able to realize it directly, in one meditative session, the mental image becomes totally transparent, and you actually are perceiving the the object directly. That's when you become an Arya being. And for the lower tenets, you became an Arya when you're perceiving the Four Noble Truths. And you're perceiving selflessness with that direct perceiver, but not directly. You're perceiving the impermanent aggregates and so forth. Only thing that would adhere to that direct perceiver would be impermanent phenomena. But for the upper Mahayana tenets, you can actually be perceiving directly, with a direct perceiver, permanent phenomena such as emptiness. Okay? So that makes sense? You'll grok on it for a while. Okay. So Don, you had a question?
I was going to say it doesn't make any sense.
Is that what it is?
It's discussed in the schools, but they recommend.
disgusting. What?
Discussed.
Oh, disgust in.
Or identified whether or not they assert self-cognizance. What's the significance of whether they're sort of self-cognizant or not?
Some of the schools, he's asking, what's the big deal? What's the significance about whether the schools accept self-cognizing awareness? Rangrik. Rang means self, Rikpa means to know. Like we had Rikpa Chempongak. Remember Rikpa, to know or to, Rangrik, self-knower. So besides the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika, all of the other schools take illusions. When the Buddha talked about something called Rangrik in sutras, they took it to mean a kind of awareness which was necessary in order to remember the subjective aspect. For instance, when the consciousness is knowing an object, the conscious knowing of the object allows you to recall the object. The question arises, how can you have a memory that you indeed were the perceiver of that object? So it seems as though there has to be something verifying not only the object, which is the consciousness, but another conscious element within the consciousness looking inward. So that's why they say in the definitions it says, only looks inward, that is perceiving. Rangrik is a quality of the mind. It's not called a mental factor, but it's like it is itself a direct perceiver, which is knowing only itself, only consciousness. So it's called, what did we call it? Bearing the aspect, sometimes it's said, bearing the aspect of an apprehender. So its aspect, the aspect that appears to Rangrik, to self-knower, what kind of aspect? Is it color or shape or something else? None of those aspects appear. The only aspect that appears to Rangrik is knowingness, knowing. That is, it knows the consciousness. It knows Shepa, the consciousness that it is the same nature as. So, I don't know. There may be other, it may come in some other kinds of places, what kind of philosophical ramifications or whatever that might have. But basically, the highest philosophical school, the Prasangika, has a way of explaining how memory takes place without the need of that Rangrik. And because of their sort of exclusive way, their special way of positing consciousness that's different than the lower schools. So as we have a chance to study again and again, it's one of the subjects that is in Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way, the Madhyamaka Vatara, which was a great treatise that we study in the monasteries to understand the middle way, especially the Prasangika view. Chandrakirti was kind of like the in a sense, the founder of the Prasangika. Okay, maybe you can say Buddha, some different points of view. I think Buddhapalita didn't actually use the term Prasangika. Actually, Chandrakirti didn't either, but he criticized Bhava-viveka and said that it was possible to know things merely with a prasanga, with a consequence. So they called it consequentialists and so forth. So in Chandrakirti's text, he has a section where he refutes various ideas of the Chittamatra, because that's the main, at that point, the Chittamatra and Bhava-viveka, some other strands of the Madhyamika, were the main competing philosophical views that people might be confused with. As Rinpoche Rinpoche mentioned this last weekend, Lama Tsongkhapa, in communication with Manjushri told him that Chandrakirti was a 10th level bodhisattva who had took birth on earth to perfectly elucidate Nagarjuna's intention, and his treatises were without error. So this is why Lama Tsongkhapa spent so much time using it, and that why all the Tibetans use Chandrakirti as the great commentator, sort of to delineate what is meant by, Nagarjuna's text. Of course, you can just read Buddhapalita and Nagarjuna's texts themselves, but in Chandrakirti's text, he spends a lot of time refuting various things about the Chittamatra, such as alaya vijnana, alaya, the foundation consciousness, why that's what the Buddha meant by alaya in the sutras when he talked about foundation consciousness, and mind only, samsam, we say in Tibetan, or Chittamatra, what the Buddha meant by that, what his actual intention was. So in order to clear up those ideas, because if we're just privy to reading different sutras, as in the Chinese tradition, you read the Lankavatara Sutra and all these things, you read these different things and it could be very confusing. What did Buddha actually mean? So here, these philosophical schools now are setting out, even though some of the lower schools say that you need this Rangrik, in the final analysis you can see that you don't need that. So that's one of the other things that Lama Tsongkhapa, that Chandrakirti refutes in the Madhyamika Vatara. Also in the Bodhisattvacharya Vatara, there's a very famous section where Shantideva explains how you can have memory without Rangrik. So he also refutes various things about the Chittamatra school. So we'll learn more about that as we study some other courses. Otherwise, be anticlimactic. What do we do? Yes, sister.
On page 17, it's talking about the Vaibhashika. You went over this, but in reading it, I really don't understand it. The mode of asserting objects, let's see, 1, 2, now about 3 or 4. The definition of a conventional mind.
Conventional mind or conventional truth?
Conventional truth, excuse me, you're right. That whole section right there, it just seems like it's convoluted and I don't understand it.
So you didn't have a chance to listen to the DVD from that class, probably.
I did listen to it.
Okay. Because we said the reason for this is to be able to include within this definition also the Buddha's perception of conventional truth. Because if you just said a conventional truth is an object which is found by a valid cognizer distinguishing a conventionality, okay, that would exclude certain things that are conventionalities from being conventionalities, because, say, for a Buddha's mind which is analyzing the ultimate also perceives conventional objects.
Why would a Buddhist mind want to do that?
Why would it want to? It just does. It's omniscient.
I mean, it just has
You can't help it. It's just omniscient.
If he's omniscient, his mind just knows things and he doesn't have to think. He doesn't have to do anything with his mind.
Okay, think about it. Let's as this is our last class, we have to finish up. No, not that much, but let's go back to that as a let's go back to that at the end, okay? Okay. So how far did we get? Did we get onto the next page? So I heard there were competing opinions of how far. Are we on page 18, mode of asserting object possessors, subjects? That's where, in the middle of that? Okay. 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 Subsequent cognizers are pervaded by valid direct perceivers? Okay, so why is that? Subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers. Let's try to figure that out. Prasagigaput. Well, are necessarily. The word pervasion here, you could say subsequent cognitions are pervaded by being valid direct perceivers. And if you wanted to say that in other words, you could say subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers. That's what that means, right? To be pervaded by, right? So what does that mean? Subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers. Would the lower schools accept that? Why not, George?
I don't remember.
Oh, come on now. That you do, don't you remember in kindergarten you got no credit if you just gave the right answer but you didn't have a reason?
Because they're not fresh and controvertible knowers.
First of all, that would if they're subsequent cognizers for the lower schools, they wouldn't be valid, right?
Because they're not fresh.
Because they're not fresh, that's one thing. But not all subsequent cognizers are, there are different kinds of subsequent cognizers, right? Basically, if we divided subsequent cognizers, there's two kinds. Those that are the subsequent cognition of perceptions, we're talking about from the Sautrantika point of view, and subsequent cognizers that are the subsequent moments of conceptions, the succeeding moments of conceptions. One of them is perceptual, one of them is conceptual. But here, it says subsequent cognizers, so you're saying in total, in general, are necessarily valid direct perceivers. So you've just explained one thing that is different than the lower schools. For Prasangika, for something to be a subsequent cognizer does not preclude it from being valid. Okay? But Prasangika says subsequent cognizers are necessarily valid direct perceivers.
That part I don't understand.
Is that because you can't have a subsequent cognizer without having a valid direct perceiver?
Yeah, but why? But what if it's a subsequent moment of a conception? How is that a direct perceiver? We talked a little bit about this last time. Darcy, were you here last time? Leo?
I was not here.
Okay. Everyone's trying to get out of this. Breege will know. She's been. You weren't here. Okay. Okay. What do you think the reason?
Well, what I got out of, I think Reba Rinpoche was actually talking about the notion of, or maybe it was you prior to Rinpoche, the notion that if you can be a valid direct perceiver of emptiness.
Yeah, that statement actually makes sense. You can be a direct perceiver. Yeah, you could say that.
And that's necessarily conceptual.
A direct perceiver of emptiness is necessarily conceptual? Okay, we're going wrong here. We're going backwards. Subsequent cognizers, basically, what's the definition of subsequent cognizer from the Sautrantika point of view? Let's ask our Lurig expert.
Going blank right now. Well, that which realizes what's already been realized.
Okay, so it realizes what has already been realized. For the lower tenets, Sautrantika and so forth, it can't be valid because a valid perceiver or pramana has to be, among other things, it has to be new or fresh. It has to be a new, incontrovertible knower, right? An incontrovertible means that it realizes the object. So a subsequent cognizer can't be a valid cognizer for the lower tenets, but for Prasangika, they say valid cognizers don't have to be fresh. They can be subsequent, but there are two kinds of subsequent cognizers. This is the point I'm making. Those that are perceptual, those are conceptual. So this is saying subsequent cognizers in general. So let's take the one which is conceptual. What are different things like that, like subsequent moments of memory? Okay, it's a conceptual consciousness, right? So, if you're remembering something, realizing it, say, remembering consciousness of emptiness, once you've realized emptiness, conceptually, you've realized emptiness conceptually. Now, subsequent to that, it can't be just subsequent moments of a correct belief or a doubt, because that's not called subsequent cognition, because it has to be realizing that which was already realized. It has to be a realizing consciousness, right? So how could that be a direct perceiver? That's the question I'm asking. Carrie?
Perceiving the previous moment. Previous
So it's
perception.
not. So then it's not directly perceiving emptiness. It's directly perceiving the previous moment, which was consciousness. You mean? I'm not sure. What do you think, Frank? Do you have any? Didn't we talk about this last time? Okay, Venerable, what do you say?
Then can it be that you're having a valid direct perception of the conception?
Valid direct perception of the conception.
Like what you...
No. I don't think so.
What you've already experienced, what you've already conceived, then
No, what you conceived, you're conceiving something via a mental image, right? So it's saying the subsequent moments of that, say if you've realized it, you're not just a conception in general, but a realizing conception. How many realizing conceptions are there? Only one? Only one conceptual mind that can realize? Inference? How many different kinds of conceptual minds can realize their objects? Only inference? No, you can also have remembering consciousness, which is conceptual, remembering something that you directly perceive. That also is a subsequent cognition induced by a direct perception. But the question is, that's still a conceptual mind. You're still knowing the object via a mental image. How can that be classified as a direct perception or direct perceiver? This is sort of unique Prasangika tenets. Does our British, Scottish nun have any? Venerable? Are you trying to...
Could you use an example other than emptiness is a conception?
Emptiness is not a conception. Emptiness is an object, right?
In the example we're talking about, use something.
Why? Why? What's wrong with emptiness?
We don't have Nothing's wrong with emptiness. I think we'd all say that, but I think it was because the second moment doesn't depend on the sign.
How about, okay, so according to the lower schools, there were different views, remember? The second moment after a inferential cognizer was no longer an inferential cognizer. It was just a subsequent cognizer because why? No. The subsequent cognizer is no. Because it wasn't realizing its object primarily by depending on a correct sign. Only the first moment of the inference depended on the correct sign to give rise to that inference. I think that's what Don was recalling, right? The subsequent moments are being pulled along by that, so they're called subsequent cognition. So here, that is also called a direct perceiver, because you can realize things only in two ways, via inference and via direct perception, according to Prasangika. So if it's no longer an inference, because it's not depending on a correct sign. So now Prasangika goes one step further, says it's a direct perceiver. Pardon me? No, it's still a conceptual mind. Still conceptual. But that is called a direct perceiver because it is knowing its object. It is not just knowing its object. It is realizing its object, not in dependence upon a correct sign. So even remembering consciousnesses that were memories of, let's say, direct perceptions, so they're realizing consciousnesses, they'd also be called direct perceivers for Prasangika. So these are little kind of, we mentioned last time, they kind of are building on different kinds of sort of anomalies in the different tenets, like when we said the second moment. For some of the Sautrantika schools, the second moment, I'm going to say the second moment of can't say the second moment of an inference because it's no longer an inference to call second moment, right? The moment after an inference, the second moment, is no longer an inference for for some of the Sautrantika tenets because it is not depending on a correct sign. Now, but it's still conceptual. Here, we're saying that that is a direct perceiver for Prasangika because it's not depending on a correct sign. Okay, so that's just something to think about, okay? There are 4 kinds of inferential cognizers. Inferential cognizers arising by the power of the fact. That's the usual kind of inferential cognizer. That's the same terminology that we had before. Inferential cognizers through renown. What are those? What's an example of an inferential cognizer through renown? Do you remember, Thea? You know? Okay, that's honest. Venerable, do you know? Okay, Trime? Who knows? Venerable, we talked many times when we talked about inferential cognition. Pat, do you remember inferential cognition through renown? What was the example of renown when we talked about it? Anyone know? Yeah. So what does that mean? No, not conventional thinking is a particular kind of inference that realizes it is suitable to call this gobbledygook because it is within objects of knowledge. In other words, there is no name that inherently abides in objects. So it is suitable to call the rabbit bearer by the name moon, by the sign, by the reason that the rabbit bearer exists among objects of knowledge. Remember, that was the kind of reasoning that was given. So that's called, that kind of inference that realizes that. You might say there's a small subset of different kinds of reasonings. That's called inferential cognizer through renown. That's the same as before. Now here, the Prasangika has another one. Usually we had 3. Inferential cognizer through the power of the fact, through renown, and through belief. Now the Prasangika adds one, inferential cognizer that realizes through example. Okay, let's see what it says here. Inferential cognizer through renown, an inferential cognizer that realizes the meaning through an example are included in inferential cognizer by the power of the fact. In fact, that's what we had said before. Inferential cognizer through renown was a subset of inferential cognizer by the power of the fact. If it is a valid cognizer, it is not pervaded by being non-mistaken. So let's go back. Let's check here in Geshe Sopa's commentary. The translation, I think, of the text here is mainly by Jeffrey Hopkins, and the commentary is mainly, extra commentary is mainly by Geshe Sopa, great bodhisattva, great scholar, if you ever get a chance. I think Geshe is coming to San Jose in February, something? January, if you have a chance to study with him. Speaks English, teaches in English very excellently. So where do we find here these kinds of inferences? There must be a section here, right? Who knows? 313. Okay. Do we have these kind of inferential cognizers we're talking about? By example? Well, let's take a look at page 312 first. We'll answer this other question. The first paragraph down, sort of like a third of the way down the page. The same holds true for an inferential consciousness. Once an inference has been produced, its subsequent moments are subsequent cognitions that the consequentialist system, the Prasangika, alone accepts as direct valid cognition. Only the Prasangika. This is called pratyaksha pramana. Pratyaksha. That's what is the Sanskrit for direct perceiver. Pramana means valid cognition. Since subsequent moments of an inferential consciousness do not rely again on reason, on a reason in order to cognize the object, the second period is no longer inferential but direct. Okay, that's what we had said before. Okay, so let's see here. Inferences of 4 types on page 13. Inference by the power of the fact that serves as a logical sign, such as the presence of dependent arising, which is a sign of an absence of inherent existence. What does that mean? It's like by the power of the fact. So you can have an inference by the power of the fact. This is talking about how inferential cognizers can arise. By the power of the fact means, flowers are non-inherently existent because they are dependent arisings. If something, you'd have to establish, first of all, that if something were a dependent arising, it is necessarily non-inherently existent. Then you can prove that, then you can use that reasoning. It's kind of interesting. You might say, wow, if you know that, you've already proved emptiness. You've already established emptiness. Indeed, you have to have a growth, in order to use that reasoning, the king of reasonings, dependent arising, you already have to sort of prove emptiness in a gross sense, first of all. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. That's not a subject to go into here. Maybe in the Shine Lacton course on the weekends. So, inference by the power of the sign, such as sound is impermanent because it's a product. That was one thing. Then, inference by renown, such as coming to know that the term moon is suitable to express that object. As is in the Tibetan text or in Sanskrit, it says it is the inference that understands that the rabbit possessor, that is the moon, is suitable to be called moon. Inference through example, okay, here, such as inferring what a cow without a dewlap is. It's funny, like Fabrizio this weekend, did you notice? Everyone started laughing at one point, and he didn't understand when he said, okay, shape up your motivation. Do you remember that? Because I think he did, we say shape your motivation, but he would say shape up in English means like shape up, come on. Come on, Carrie, shape. Come on, Pat, shape up. And he did. I don't think he realized that the colloquial use of it, that he was sort of surprised. Why are you all laughing? I'm being serious. Shape up your motivation. So you're all laughing about the dewlap. What is a dewlap? Who knows what a dewlap is? In fact, that's a sign. That's one of the distinguishing characteristics of a cow, right? Okay, some cows have dewlaps, some do not. Why do they call it a dewlap? Do you know? Does it have something to do with the dew?
No.
Dewlap.
Oh, is that what you like to do?
You'll have to check the etymology, but that's one of the distinguishing characteristic of some cows. As I forgot your name, Diana. Diane, Diana, and Diana. I keep on thinking Ellen. There's another Ellen. Okay, Diana. Good, we got that straight. So, for instance, inference through example, such as knowing what a cow without a dewlap is. So, in other words, there are cows without dewlaps. But if in your village you've only seen cows with dewlaps, and someone says there are cows in central Bihar without a dewlap, and then you can realize that, because you've realized this, you can have a inferential cognition of what those are like by example. Okay, that's what's meant here. Such as realizing what a cow without a dewlap is through knowledge of a cow with a dewlap. Okay, so you can realize what Dharma practitioners with realization of emptiness is by realizing, you can infer that by realizing what Dharma practitioners like ourselves without realization of emptiness is like. No? Okay, thanks for pointing that out. Okay. And then inference through correct belief, or through belief. I don't know if the correct necessarily has to be there, in which a scripture is realized to be incontrovertible with respect to what it teaches, due to not being implicitly or explicitly contradicted by other scriptures, inference, or direct perception. Those are called the three purities. Something which is shown to be, not contradicted in these three ways: by other sutras, by other scriptures that the Buddha taught, by either inference or direct perception. Then you can recognize that that scripture is correct with respect to what it teaches. This has to do, you have to investigate what that means. Like, for instance, when the Buddha taught about deeply hidden phenomena, we can realize those deeply hidden phenomena in dependence on the scriptures or the pronouncements of the Buddha, his speech, which has been shown to be pure or not contradicted by other statements that he made. It is not contradicted by inference, and is not contradicted by direct perception. We have to verify that the Buddha is a valid person, like that. So that's called correct inference arising from correct belief or through belief. So that's similar to what we've had before, but now the Prasangika adds that fourth kind of inference by example that the others, similar to some of the non-Buddhist schools, they also talk about whole different kinds of inferences, whole category of ones. Inferential cognition. Okay. If it is a valid cognizer, it is not pervaded by being non-mistaken with respect to its determined object, and then it gives a reason. So there's a couple negatives in here. Can we make it as someone make it, that statement, without using the word pervaded and without the double negatives? Who's quick? Who's nimble? Well, it says, if it is a valid cognizer, it is not pervaded by being non-mistaken. It is not pervaded by being non-mistaken. So what does that mean? A valid cognizer is necessarily mistaken with respect to its determined object. Are all valid cognizers, do all valid cognizers have determined objects? What kind of valid cognizers have determined objects? What are determined objects? When we talked about objects, it's one of the synonyms of conceived object. Shelja, I think. The object. Shelja means Shelwara Jawa, Venerable. Remember we were talking in Tibetan class? Shelwar Jawa, shortened, Shelja, that which is to be intellectually weighed or determined. Sometimes they say Jelwa means to weigh, so it means to be determined. So it has to do with it's a synonym of conceived object. So do all valid cognizers have conceived objects? Georgie? Which valid cognizers have conceived objects? Only conceptual valid cognizers have conceived objects, right? So that's why I think it's in this double negative, because it's saying if it is a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object. Okay? So it's necessarily mistaken with respect to its determined object. Valid cognizers, according to the lower schools, if it's a conceptual valid cognizer, is it necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object? Lower schools? Isn't it non-mistaken with respect to its determined object? Yeah. It's mistaken with respect to what? Appearing object. But with respect to the conceived object or the determined object, if it's a valid cognizer, for lower schools, it has to be unmistaken with respect to that. It has to not make mistake. It thinks about rabbit, and that's what it's thinking about. But here it says if it's a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken. Can be mistaken with respect to its determined object. Why? Because an inferential cognizer, I'm going to put on my glasses here to read this, realizing sound as impermanent is a mistaken consciousness with respect to sound as impermanent. Why is that?
Because they infer that sound is impermanent, they haven't actually had the direct experience of sound as being impermanent, the direct experience of impermanence.
You mean the direct receiver? You mean, in other words, there can't be a valid inferential cognizer? Come on, this is Buddhists say there are two kinds of valid cognizers. Direct valid cognizers, and those that realize their objects validly via inference. So we can know things validly. We can realize them with conception. This is the Buddhist understanding. You don't need only direct perception. You can, if you use an inference, a correct sign, logical reasoning, you can realize certain things, such as emptiness. You can realize emptiness. As yet, at that point, it's only conceptual. It's only an inferential cognizer, but it's still a realization. And via that, by concentrating on that again and again, meditating on that, that mental image can disappear and you can have a direct realization of emptiness eventually. But an inferential cognizer can be valid. Okay? So what is meant here by valid cognizer is not necessarily non-mistaken. So it is not necessarily non-mistaken. So it is can be mistaken with respect to its determined object, because an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, says it impermanent, right? Isn't that right? Sound is impermanent, is a mistaken consciousness with respect to sound as impermanent. What do you say? Remember, didn't we talk about perceptions above that are mistaken consciousness? What did we just say? Somewhere here. They do not assert self-cognizing direct perceivers. This is the third paragraph down in that, right? Sense consciousnesses in sentient beings' continuums are pervaded by being mistaken consciousnesses. Why is that? Why are sense consciousnesses in sentient beings' continuums pervaded by being mistaken consciousnesses? Because what is a mistaken consciousness? It is mistaken with respect to its appearing object, right? Why is a sense consciousness mistaken with respect to its appearing object?
Inherently existing. Because it sees it as inherently existing.
The way it
appears, yeah, you can say it sees it as, and it appears as inherently existent, and that is a mistake. It is not inherently existent. Does that mean that sense direct perceivers are necessarily not valid? They don't realize their object? What do you think, Ben?
No.
Why not?
You can still see the flower, but still understand that it's not inherently existent.
It's valid to the convention.
You can see the flower and see that it's not inherently existent? No, I think you're
Speaking of mistaken consciousness, I made a mistake and I haven't given the you, and we're about to run out of time in about 20 seconds.
Okay.
So you're going to have to take a break.
Okay, so mistaken. Okay, so think about what you said, and well, let's take a break for cake. Okay, so the last paragraph here says, if it is a consciousness, it is necessarily or is pervaded by realizing its object of comprehension, because the mental image of a rabbit's horn is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit, and the mental image of sound is as permanent is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending sound as permanent. So what do you think? Is this the same as lower schools? Consciousness is pervaded by realizing its object of comprehension. The object of comprehension. I have to see what the Tibetan is here. See if that... This is number 6, right? Prasangika section. She? 35, 37... Oh, here we go. This is the end of section 5, right? Ribon Ra Don Chi. Here we go. Trakpe Chepak Dam Pen Semayina Rangi Shenyul La Matrupe Makepte Damitak Tuk. Do we just do that one? Sound isn't permitting, okay. Shepa Yena Rangi Shelja. Rangi Shelja Tokbe Kyapte. What did we have? We had Shenyul, Shelja. Rangi Shenyul. Before determined object, right? Here, determined object is not what I was saying. It was Shelja. This is Shenyul. That just means that which is intellectually determined. Here, it's object of comprehension, which is sort of the object of intellectual measurement. Shelja. Shepa Yena Rangi Shelja Tokbe Kyapte is pervaded by realizing its object of comprehension. Okay. So, because the mental image of a rabbit's horns is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit. So Prasangika says even when you have a mistaken consciousness, such as apprehending the something which is non-existent, like the horns of a rabbit, still you are every consciousness realizes something, even if it's a mistaken consciousness, such as it realizes the mental image itself of the mistaken object. In this case, the mental image of the rabbit's horns and so forth. So you can check in Cutting Through Appearances for more details about these things. Let's just try to finish.
The text in here, by the way, explains it.
Okay, good. On 314, okay. So now, mode of asserting selflessness. So this is important. They, who's they? Prasangika, assert a gross selflessness of persons. What is a gross selflessness of persons for the lower schools? Almost exclusively, it's the person being empty of being permanent, partless, and independent. And the subtle selflessness is the emptiness of being self-supporting, substantially existent. Here, the Prasangika asserts the gross selflessness of persons is a person's emptiness of being self-supporting and substantially existent. The subtle selflessness of persons is the person's emptiness of being truly existent. Okay, remember we said here the object of the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena are not determined by the object of negation. In both cases, the object of negation is the same for Prasangika, emptiness of true existence. It's the basis that's different. Whereas for Chittamatra, the selflessness of, or let's say for the Sautrantika, the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena could still be on the same basis. Like, say, with respect to Mark, we could say the selflessness of persons would be Mark's emptiness of being self-supporting, substantially existent. An example of selflessness of phenomena would be Mark's emptiness of being truly existent for the Sautrantika. So on one base you could have selflessness of persons, selflessness of phenomena. But for Prasangika, the object of negation is the same in both cases. So selflessness of persons refers, the basis has to be persons, sentient beings. Well, not necessarily sentient beings, also Buddha. They assert gross selflessness. They posit a gross selflessness of phenomena, that is, the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles, and the valid cognizer apprehending it being other substances, and a subtle selflessness of phenomena, that is, the emptiness of true existence of the aggregates, the basis of imputation. So leave aside this first statement about, it almost sounds like Chittamatra view, right? That's not what's meant here. And in questioning Geshe Sopa this last summer, it seems to be some particular way of understanding this. So we won't worry about that right now, but the gross selflessness of phenomena, because in general, if you check in Chandrakirti's texts and so forth, they don't talk about a gross selflessness of phenomena in the Prasangika. Here, this is a particular way of looking at the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles, and the valid cognizer apprehending it being other substances. Let's leave that for the time being. The actual selflessness of phenomena is the subtle selflessness of phenomena, that is the emptiness of true existence. Here it says, of the aggregates, the basis of imputation. So it doesn't have to be the aggregates, it can be permanent phenomena also are empty of being truly existent. What it means is the subtle selflessness of phenomena is the emptiness of true existence of the object in question. So always we have to talk about in Prasangika. Remember when we talked in other courses, we said there's something called a referent object? You know what a referent object is? The mikul? Like, say, for instance, if I'm conceiving of Darcy, okay? Darcy, if I'm conceiving Darcy to be truly existent, Darcy is, the conventionally existent Darcy is the referent object of that wrong conception. That's the referent. The conventionally existent Darcy, which does exist conventionally as merely imputed, that's the referent object. That's the object I'm observing and I'm referring to. The conceived object is a truly existent Darcy. Capisci? Capisce? I'm conceiving the conventionally existent phenomena as being truly existent. I'm not conceiving Darcy's aggregates to be truly existent Darcy. That wouldn't be, in general, this wrong view. Let's say, for instance, if I talk about the cup, if I have true grasping at the cup or the mug, I'm grasping at the conventionally existent cup, which is imputed onto these parts, merely imputed onto these parts, and I am conceiving of it as being truly existent. Okay? There can be gross, that's the subtle selflessness, the subtle self of phenomena, subtle self-grasping. If you talk about grosser things, which thinks the parts are the cup or something, those are intellectually formed. But the subtle, innate self-grasping, this is what Rinpoche has been talking about in the Shine Laktung course on the weekend. There are two different things, the object and the subject, right? When we talk about the innate, I think Fabrizio was saying simultaneously bored, but innate, subtle, innate self-grasping. That's the one that we want to overcome. That's the one, the innate self-grasping is the one that has perpetuated our staying in cyclic existence since time immemorial, since beginningless time. We've had incidences of intellectually formed delusions also, intellectually formed self-grasping, but that's not, that comes and goes depending on the innate, always arisen, comes in any one lifetime, intellectually conceived of because of this innate self-grasping. The innate self-grasping comes about because whenever we label something validly, mug, Darcy, Leo, Thea, wristwatch, whatever I label, say, oh, this is wristwatch. As soon as I label it, and in essence, that phenomena comes to exist for me, because the phenomena only exists as an imputation or as a conception. Before that, I was only conceiving a collection of parts, or I just saw a piece of metal, and then someone says, oh, piece of metal, glass, that's a Rolex. Not this, but, suddenly say, oh, a Rolex. Then suddenly Rolex, that conception, that phenomena Rolex exists for me. As soon as I label Rolex, this is not, don't worry, I don't have a Rolex. This is like a Tara Milwani, dear Dharma sister, gave me this some years ago. It's like a $29, some kind of, knockoff from Singapore. But it looks, some people thought it looked like, there's one you see in Newsweek, what's it called? It looks a little bit like this if you, I don't know, something like that. And someone said, how does a monk have a watch like that? I said, don't worry, it's not, yeah, it's just a cheap watch. But if someone were to, once you impute a phenomena, or you say, oh, this is my friend Dorje, this is Jason. Someone says, this is Jason. And they say, oh, Jason, you label Jason. Before that, you were labeling it something else. You were labeling it boy, sentient being, man, bearded stranger. I don't know what you were labeling it as. Or maybe not so bearded, stranger. As soon as you label that phenomena, as soon as you label actually correctly, that phenomena is conventionally existent for you. But as soon as you've labeled, it appears back that it's existing, that Dorje or Jason is existing from his own side. The conventionally existent imputation is superimposed on the appearance, the appearance of a truly existent Jason or Dorje. You cannot separate them with your mind. This is what Rinpoche was mentioning also. So in grasping the true existence, your referent object is always something which does exist, a conventionally existent phenomena, and you conceive of it as being truly existent. Well, it might not be, your referent object might be a non-existent, but anyway, like the rabbit's horn, and you conceive of it as truly existent, but in general, even then there's something that you're realizing, the mental image, and so forth. Okay, so the Prasangika posits the subtle selflessness of phenomena, the emptiness of true existence. So, for instance, here, when it's talking about the aggregates, why does it mention the aggregates? Because as we said in the Heart Sutra, when Avalokiteshvara, the Arya Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, is explaining to Shariputra about how to meditate, how the Bodhisattvas meditate on the profound perfection of wisdom, the practice. And he says they meditate and realize that the aggregates also are empty of inherent existence, natural existence, inherent existence. synonym of true existence. Also, because when you, especially in the Hinayana, mainly you're meditating on the selflessness of person. You're not meditating on the selflessness of phenomena, right? So here in the Mahayana, even though it's more profound, the object of negation on the emptiness of the person, selflessness of the person, is not just emptiness of self-supporting substantial existence, but emptiness of true existence. Also, once you meditate on the emptiness of the person, then simply by changing your view, you now observe the basis of imputation of the person, the aggregates. Now you meditate on the emptiness of phenomena by realizing the aggregates too are empty. I don't mean too, emptiness. Also, the aggregates also are empty of true existence. That's why I said if I'm conceiving Darcy to be truly existent, I'm not observing her aggregates, her body and mind, and conceiving them to be truly existent. That would be an instance of grasping to a self of phenomena, truly existent phenomena. But the person who is imputed upon those aggregates, conceiving of that, observing that, which is a conventional phenomena, and conceiving it to be truly existent, that is the ignorance that binds us within cyclic existence, let's say, that kind of grasping for the persons and phenomena, and the wrong view, the view of the transitory collection, which is from Chandrakirti's point of view, the main ignorance, Prasangika, the main ignorance from his point of view that keeps us in cyclic existence, is viewing the person who is imputed on your aggregates. When you think me, I, Frank, I, Diana, I, which is legitimately labeled to your aggregates, but as soon as you've labeled it and you conceive of yourself as, there's this appearance in your mind of something, although you're referring to that conventional person, that's your actual object of observation, the conventional I, you're conceiving it to be truly existent because it appears within your mind. There's an appearance of something truly existent, existing from its own side, not just labeled onto your body and mind. You say, when you meditate, you say, Leo is just a name. Leo is just a concept. Then watch in your own mind how that seems to be, whether that's how your mind is conceiving of yourself. Your mind seems to be conceiving of Leo, if that's your name, as being something different than just a name. It's like really something that is existing there really, truly, from its own side, without the need of being labeled. Truly existent, naturally existent, inherently existent. That's the object of negation, that truly existent person. So that's why we did meditation at the beginning, to try to recognize the object of negation. The two subtle selflessnesses are differentiated according to their bases of emptiness, right? The subtle selflessness of persons and the subtle selflessness of phenomena. Subtle selflessness of persons is differentiated by the basis, persons, and subtle selflessness of phenomena by the basis, phenomena, which are other than persons, such as the aggregates and other things. Not like the lower tenets where what is the difference between subtle selflessness of phenomena and persons, like say in the Sautrantika and Chittamatra, is done on the basis of negation. On the object of negation. What's being negated? Self-supporting substantial existence, or true existence, or self-supporting substantially existence, or emptiness of being, of form and form-realizing consciousness being different substances, and so forth. The two selflessnesses are differentiated according to their bases of emptiness and not according to their objects of negation, right? Because the refutation of the object of negation, true existence, upon the base person, is the subtle selflessness of persons. And the refutation of the object of negation, true existence, the same object of negation, upon the base, the aggregates, is an instance of the subtle selflessness of phenomena. Here it says, aggregates, don't cover all phenomena, because can you divide all phenomena into 5 aggregates? What do you think, Venerable? Can you divide all phenomena into 5 aggregates? What do you think? Non-compounded space, yeah. So 5 aggregates, anything that's impermanent, you can divide into 5 aggregates. Most things are just one aggregate. Like say, forms are all form aggregate. Even if it has plastic, glass, and metal or something, it's still form aggregate, right? What are other kinds of phenomena that are impermanent? Consciousness, that goes in the consciousness aggregate, or the feeling, or the compositional factors, or the discrimination aggregates. What about non-associated compositional factors? Aren't they also impermanent? No, non-associated compositional factors means things like the person, time. Where do they go? Well, they go in the compositional factors aggregate. There's 2 kinds. Compositional factors associated with mind, such as the mental factors, and non-associated compositional factors, such as acquisition, person, time, different things like that. So, yeah, don't worry about that. I think in the Vaibhashika, there's 14 kinds of, I think 14, 22, I can't remember, 14 kinds of non-associated compositional factors. Acquisition is a kind of, like say, when you've got all the conditions for something and it's definitely going to happen in the future, although it's not happened yet, you said to have acquired that. So you've acquired rebirth in the lower realms, although you're not born there yet. So that's called, okay, not you, me. You're not going to be born in the lower realms. Okay, presentation of the grounds and paths, last section. This is 2 divisions, objects of abandonment and actual presentation of grounds and paths. So the objects of abandonment, this is interesting because it's different than the lower schools. The gross and subtle self-graspings, together with their seeds, as well as attachment and so forth, that is the klesha, the afflictions, here it says the delusions, together with their seeds that arise due to the power of self-grasping, due to the power of that first thing, gross and subtle self-grasping, are the so-called afflicted obstacles, or deluded obstacles, that mainly obstruct the attainment of liberation. So sometimes there's 2 synonyms, but they have different names. The afflicted obstacles, or the obstacles or obstructions to liberation, means the same thing. Because according to Prasangika also, to achieve liberation, even to achieve arhatship, you have to realize emptiness. Not just the selflessness of persons, the person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. You have to realize the emptiness of phenomena. So there's a lot of discussion in Chandrakirti's texts and Shantideva and so forth, that it is not sufficient just to realize the gross selflessness of persons, the person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. You will not even be able to get out of cyclic existence, let alone attain enlightenment. Even the arhats have to realize emptiness. So is it Mark? If even the arhats, the hearers, solitary realizers, realize emptiness, what's the difference between the Hinayana and Mahayana? They have the same wisdom.
Accumulation of merit.
Your name is Mark.
And B.
Because you abide among objects of knowledge. Okay, very good. That's not the right answer, though. Here it says that for the Prasangika, suddenly now everyone realizes emptiness. That is, all the people who attain either arhatship, the hearers, or solitary realizers, the two kinds of Hinayana vehicles, or the bodhisattvas, who eventually achieve enlightenment. It's not as though only the bodhisattvas realize emptiness and the other people realize something which are, they eliminate obstructions to liberation by some other lower realization. Here, the obstructions to liberation are grasping to true existence. Emptiness is emptiness, okay, that's all right, yeah. That's probably what they say down in Boca Raton. Emptiness is emptiness. No, my point is this. What's if the hearers and solitary realizers, as well as the bodhisattvas, realize emptiness, what's the difference between them? Now, Sister Oma said collection of motivation. What's the motivation of the Hinayana arhats?
To release
In a word.
the liberation of the samsara, self-liberation.
Self.
Renunciation. That's their motivation. Renunciation of samsara. What's the motivation of the bodhisattvas? In a word.
The liberation for all sentient.
Bodhicitta. In a word. Liberation for all sentient beings is not a word. It could be labeled as a word, I suppose, but it's a phrase. Yeah.
Merit will also be designated as a difference between the two.
But that's a result of their motivation. That's not the differentiation. If you just said that's a differentiation, that's not really differentiating them. For the lower tenets, that's the differentiation between the hearers and solitary realizers. They realize, like say the Vaibhashika, they realize the same thing, the Four Noble Truths. They realize directly. And thereby, they eliminate the subtle selflessness, subtle grasping to persons, which is the person being self-supporting, substantially existent. The difference between the hearers and solitary realizers is the solitary realizers collect merit for a greater period of time. And also the Buddhas realize the same thing, the Four Noble Truths, and they're only differentiated by, according to the lower tenets, collection of merit over 3 countless great eons. But here we're not talking mainly about that. We're saying that the distinguishing factor between the different lineages is not the wisdom, is the method. Now, collection of merit is a result of merit, is a result of method. When you talk about, collection, you say wisdom brings about the collection of wisdom, right? When we say sonam, what do we call it? Yeshegi sok, the collection of wisdom, and which gives rise to what? The Dharmakaya. Method, whether it be renunciation or bodhicitta, brings about the collection of merit. Okay, we say collection of merit, especially for the bodhisattvas. It's that which gives rise to what? The form body of the Buddha. The form body of the Buddha arises because of the collection of merit. But that comes about because of method. Method is the mechanism by which you collect merit. And wisdom is the mechanism by which you collect the accumulation or accumulate the collection, whatever word you want to use, of wisdom. Okay, so they're not exactly the same. So gross and subtle self-graspings, together with their seeds and so forth, the delusions, together with their seeds that arise due to the power of self-grasping, are the deluded obstacles that mainly obstruct the attainment of liberation. So here, grasping to true existence is what prevents liberation. For the lower tenets, some of the lower tenets don't even accept that there is such a thing that's wrong, that has to be abandoned. According to the Hinayana, grasping to phenomena as truly existent is good. Right? According to Sautrantika, grasping to phenomena as truly existent only prevents you from attaining near enlightenment. You can still attain Nirvana, if you're grasping to phenomena as truly existent, all you have to do is get rid of grasping to the person as being self-supporting, substantially existent. So there's a big difference here. The propensities of grasping at true existence, that is, you say the imprints, in Tibetan we say bakchak, the propensities of grasping at true existence, and all parts of the mistaken dualistic appearance that arise due to the power of these imprints are the obstacles to omniscience, and obstacles that mainly obstruct the attainment of an exalted knower of all. Exalted knower of all, we know our friend, the Kankapater Kunken, that means Namba Tamche Kemba. That's short, his name is Kunken. Just short for that, means the exalted knower of all, or omniscient mind. So, here, for the lower tenets, the obstructions to liberation were grasping to the person as being self-supporting, substantially existent. Almost all of them, right? Even for the Chittamatra. And for the Sautrantika. That was what prevented liberation, grasping to the person as being self-supporting, substantially existent. They had slightly different views. Even for the lower tenets, that's the only obstruction. That's the Buddha has some other subtle things that are eliminated because of his collection of merit, but in general, that's the main thing that has to be eliminated. But for the Prasangika, and for, let's say, for the Sautrantika, Madhyamikas, that getting rid of that obstacle, grasping to self-supporting, substantially existent person, allowed one to attain liberation, but to attain enlightenment, the main obstacle was grasping to true existence and its imprints and so forth. Here, grasping to true existence is the main obstacle to liberation. Self-grasping, true grasping, is actually the obstruction to liberation, the obstruction, the afflicted obstruction. For the Svatantrikas, self-grasping is not an affliction.
Does that mean that there's no such thing as a Hinayana Arhat? Is that because they don't hold the tenets of the... I'm sorry.
No, okay.
Because they haven't abandoned grasping at phenomena?
So, Shantideva says, so in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, there's a lot of debate with the Hinayana. In the Hinayana tenets, there is no mention of selflessness of phenomena in the same way that the Madhyamaka is presenting, right? They say that one attains arhatship by seeing the four truths directly on the path of seeing, not by realizing emptiness. Emptiness is some invention, the Mahayana, And in fact, phenomena do truly exist. These Madhyamikas are nihilists because they think phenomena don't truly exist. If they didn't truly exist, you Madhyamikas wouldn't collect merit because there's no doer, there's no action, there's no no karma collected and so forth, no merit collected. So, if following those tenets, one thought one attained arhatship, if following those tenets, and that's the only understanding you had of selflessness, from the Prasangika point of view, there's no way that you would have become an arhat. So the question arises, like you said, were there no arhats then? Because it looked like they all followed those tenets. So the point is that even in the Hinayana treatises, there are allusions to the emptiness of phenomena in various places. And it seems as though that because the main thing that we have to say, for instance, in a practical point of view, the Buddha is the perfect doctor, perfect teacher, leading all beings to correct realization of emptiness eventually, first puts emphasis on the selflessness of persons, gross selflessness of persons. Meditating on that, then if that person, their mind has started to eliminate gross, causes of the delusions. They haven't, no way, even if they see the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, they are not on the path of seeing, right, from Prasangika point of view. But they do, their minds are much calmer than our minds because those are indeed objects to be abandoned. And that is a gross self of persons that has been negated and one realizes doesn't exist. So certain kinds of even innate delusions can be subdued that way, but they can't be abandoned completely from the root until you realize emptiness. That is the subtle self that even when you realize the selflessness, gross selflessness of persons, still there's a subtle sense of self behind that. I'm not talking about self-cherishing, but subtle self that is truly existent, not just self-supporting, substantially existent. So it seems as though the Hinayana Arhats that might have, let's say over the millennia or the centuries after the Buddha, those who were trained in just their tenets, from that point of view, they would not have been able to realize emptiness. But if they read the sutras, there are allusions to subtle selflessness of phenomena, when it says all phenomena are like bubbles, like froth on the ocean, like a banyan tree. You can't, not a banyan tree, what do you call it? What's the tree? Banana tree. You try to find the core. You open it up, all the leaves, there's nothing there. So illusions like that. And then later, when their minds become subtle, they may be